Hey Human Fizz, this is your last section of the digestive system unit, section 10.4, and we are focusing on the small and large intestine. Up to this point, we've looked at the alimentary canal, what it consists of, the organs that are involved, as well as any accessory organs. Our big focus is going to be on looking at absorption as well as looking at digestion. So, learning objectives in this section are going to be identifying the anatomical locations of the small and large intestines, so knowing where one starts and where one ends, understanding the function of absorption and digestion in the small intestine as well as that in the large intestine, and looking at the anatomy and physiology of the intestinal walls, which are a little bit different than they would be like maybe say in the esophagus. And then last but not least, we're going to understand the steps of defecation reflexes, which should be a fun journey. So let's get started with the small intestine. It plays a pretty key role in the digestion and absorption of nutrients. 90% of nutrient absorption occurs here. Okay, the small intestine is about 6 meters long and contains 3 segments. Now, one thing I really want you to think about is the fact that 6 meters long allows for a lot of opportunities for you to absorb nutrients. Okay, so that is one of the reasons why a lot of people ask, well, why is it so long? Why can't it be shorter? Well, the longer the tube, the more opportunities you have to get that contact with that food and absorb those nutrients. Remember, we are not 100% efficient at doing that. So our segments, as we leave the stomach, the first segment is called the duodenum. All right, and that's noted for its C kind of shape, which is tough to see. I have another image where you see it a little bit better. From there, it winds a little bit, and we go into the jejunum, which makes up the majority of this intersection, and then we wind all the way around and go through to the ileum. Okay. Just like in the stomach and in the esophagus, we have intestinal movements of peristalsis, but they are much slower than in the esophagus and the stomach. Again, trying to get that opportunity to absorb more nutrients. So there are basically 2 factors that allow us to absorb more nutrients: the length as well as the speed. So, duodenum, approximately 10 inches long. Here's that better picture. You can see it's kind of a C shape here. So not very long. It is the closest to the stomach it receives as a chyme, which remember is a chunk of food that has been slightly digested, filled with things like hydrochloric acid from the stomach, as well as pepsin, which is an enzyme that digests proteins. But it will also be the major site for secretions, digestive secretions from the liver and the pancreas. So it'd be things like glucagon, amylase, carbohydrates, bile from the liver, but just to give you an idea, that's where all of that dumps into. So actually you can see right here, this is the pancreas, the liver sits up here, and there's going to be, if you see that little green line right there, that's the common bile duct. So this duct, and I'm actually going to draw it in here just to give you a little bit of perspective, this duct comes all the way down here and then enters, okay, right about there. So this is the common bile duct, and its responsibility is basically to just bring in all of the bile from the liver, and then all of those enzymes from the pancreas. So next on the journey, as we are moving through, we enter the jejunum. Okay, as I said, the duodenum is about 10 inches long. This one is about 8 feet long. Okay, there's an abrupt end mark to the boundary between the duodenum and the duodenum and the jejunum, which is about right here. Okay, so we got about 10 inches, and then we have 8 feet of this circling all the way back and around. This is where the bulk of chemical digestion will occur, as well as nutrient absorption. So as we start to secrete all that stuff from the duodenum and enzymes, we are breaking stuff down into smaller pieces, and we are absorbing it into the bloodstream. Removal of this portion of the small intestine is one of the drastic measures that we can take for weight control. We look at things like gastric bypass, which deals with the stomach and making it smaller. But we can also do, what they would call a small intestine surgical procedure that basically chops it. Instead of 8 feet, you have 4. So what ends up happening is you might eat the same, but you might not absorb the same nutrients. So basically, you just get rid of all of it. Not the best approach. If you think about it, it's not ideal. Finally, we enter the ileum. That is our last section of the small intestine, as you can see here before we get into the colon. It is the longest. So we said that this was 10 inches, so this is 8 feet. This is actually 12 feet. And it ends in something called an ileocecal valve, which is basically a sphincter that controls the flow of material from the ileum into the large intestine. You do not want it to just be constantly dumping in there. There really isn't much for nutrient absorption throughout the ileum. It's kind of an area where we start to compact, and get that feces prepared for the colon, where we have a lot of water reabsorption. So, we've talked about that this is an area of digestion in the small intestine, but what does it use? Well, the stomach uses pepsin and hydrochloric acid, and that kind of breaks down proteins and begins dissolving food. But once that chyme enters the duodenum, we're looking at final digestion of things like simple sugars, fatty acids, and amino acids, and that's all going to occur in the small intestine. How does it go about doing that? Well, fatty acids is a great example of how that's breaking down is bile. Okay, bile is essentially an emulsifier. Fat when exposed to emulsifier will break down into lipids, which is something that our body can absorb. That's a molecule of life. So in biology, when you learn about the molecules of life, things like lipids, nucleic acids, and so on and so forth, that's what your body is doing. It's trying to break things down. Great example is in section B here. We got a protein in green, we got a polysaccharide in blue. We get digestive enzymes. For protein, that would be pepsin, and it breaks proteins into amino acids. Amino acids are considered the building blocks of proteins. We have a polysaccharide, which means many, and we break that down into monosaccharides, which are simple sugars. That way we can go through this process of active absorption. We can absorb those into the small intestine, and notice what do we have here? A blood vessel. So this process is basically so long and slow so that we can break stuff down and then absorb it into the body. So what does this wall look like? I mentioned before that's a little bit different here than it would be in the esophagus, but we have all these small finger-like projections, okay? So take a moment and take a look here. We have the serosa, we have the muscular layer, we have the circular and longitudinal muscles. We also have the submucosa, which is most notable for the blood vessels. And then all the way out here we would have our mucosa, which is basically going to be made up of all of these little villi. They increase the surface area for absorption to a maximum of about 2,200 square feet. Okay, so that's inside the small intestine. So you have 2,200 square feet. Most ranch homes are about 1,200 square feet. Most, big two-story homes are going to be about 2,200 square feet. So a simple columnar epithelium will allow for nutrient exchange through diffusion, and these arteries will absorb these nutrients and circulate back into the blood. Alright, so what we have here is a little chart that focuses on the intestinal hormones, and these are basically things that are secreted due to a stimulus. As you can see here, I want you guys to write down our first one, which is gastrin. Its stimulus is the vagus nerve stimulated upon arrival of food in the stomach, which basically means that you put food in your stomach, it sends a signal up to the brain. So it originates there. The target for that hormone is the stomach. The effects are it stimulates the production of acid as well as enzymes, and you can imagine that enzyme in the stomach should be pepsin. It also increases motility, which means the stomach will start to move. Next hormone is secretin, and the arrival of chyme in the duodenum causes that stimulus. Origin is the duodenum, target is the pancreas, stomach, liver, and that stimulates the production of alkaline buffers because we had a very acidic substance move its way into the small intestine, so we need something to buffer that out. Alkaline is a base. Gastric secretion, motility, and increase the rate of bile secretion from the liver. Last one is GIP. Arrival of chyme contains large amounts of fats and sugars, so we are going to originate that in the duodenum, target the pancreas and stomach, and stimulate the release of insulin from the pancreas. So make sure you guys get this info down. Next on the list, we are now into the large intestine. As you can see, it is a horseshoe shape. Main functions here, reabsorbing water is a biggie. Compact the feces is another one. Absorb vitamins made from bacterial actions. So there's a lot of bacteria filled in here, like E. coli. That would be something you should know, as E. coli is filled in that area. And it'll also store fecal matter kind of in the rectum and sigmoid area prior to defecation. It is fairly long, about 1.5 meters in length. So let's go through the parts. Once we exit the ileum, we have the appendix here, and that really doesn't serve that much of a purpose, but we have our compaction beginning here and exiting from the ileum. So the ileocecal valve is going to guard that connection between the ileum and the cecum and basically allow food to enter the colon. All right, now that we're in the colon, I want you to know that it is 3 times larger in diameter than the small intestine. No villi, but there is an abundance of mucus cells, which is going to help kind of lubricate and get that feces moving through. Basically, we start out here with the ascending colon, which is going to be anatomical right, transverse across the top, and then descending here and end with the sigmoid. So you do need to know these locations as we move through this process. All right, once food leaves the colon, we enter the rectum. It's approximately 6 inches long. It can expand to temporarily store feces. Ouch. It has the ability to kind of back up if you're holding on to something. And then the feces then exits the anus, which is keratinized. So keratinized is a word we use much like in the layer of skin, which just means that it's very tough and waterproof, just to make sure that you can hold in all that stuff if you need to. And then we have some muscles there. Longitudinal circular muscles of the anal sphincter basically control that exit. Big concept to understand is absorption. Water is reabsorbed. We have 1,500 milliliters of water material entering the colon every day, and it exits in our feces about 200, which means we have reabsorbed over, on average, 1,300 milliliters of water. So if you look at feces, it is actually made up of 75% water, 5% bacteria, things like E. coli, and the rest is kind of inorganic materials or stuff that cannot be digested. Now, I mentioned the previous slide that in the colon we can actually absorb some nutrients that is a byproduct of those bacterial actions. So vitamin K, B, as well as some salts will be absorbed in the large intestine as well. Now, last but not least, we have something called the defecation reflex. This is a reflex, as you can see, it's a motor impulse. We have stretch receptors that basically are, as the feces accrues in the sigmoid and the rectum, it's going to get wider and wider and wider, and eventually we're going to have a contraction. So what that does is it initiates a reflex, and that allows us to kind of have a peristaltic contraction to release that feces. That peristaltic contraction will also relax the anal sphincter a little bit and allow for smooth, sometimes passage of the fecal matter, depending upon its concentration. So it is a reflex. Notice that it goes to the spinal cord and back, and it's a powerful peristaltic contraction that kind of forces that out. So hopefully you hit on all these learning objectives today. Make sure you get these notes down in your notebook, and these are the last notes section for you. So if you have questions, please let me know. Yago out.